Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Every single Friday, right here on the podcast, what do? Well, we do a thing called FOMO Friday. Yes, we don't want you to have that fear of missing out because you're not listening to propaganda media anymore. And so we bring you these stories of the week that we think that, you probably should know about. Maybe you've already heard about them, but maybe you haven't. Maybe we go a little more in depth, whatever. We want to bring you those things so you don't experience FOMO. Right? And so from a series of articles from the Daily Wire comes this very first one, and it is about USAID. Now, USAID has been shut down by President Trump. And some of what they were doing, there was a portion of what they were doing that was good, okay? It wasn't a bad type of thing. Those are getting incorporated into other areas of the government. But the majority of it seemed like it was a giant slush fund, and a government inspector general on Wednesday sounded the alarm about problems with the now shuttered U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, and underscored how non-government organizations, okay, or they're also known as NGOs, non-government organizations, received billions of dollars from the United States in corruption-prone regions with limited accountability. Okay, this is part of the reason why USAID is not a thing anymore. Okay, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction said in a new report that, quote, since the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan in August of 2021, the U.S. government has spent billions of U.S. taxpayer funds on projects intended to provide for Afghans' basic needs. Okay, so we have spent our taxpayer money in the billions of dollars to, of course, provide for Afghans' basic needs. Okay, and a lot of people would say, okay, that's okay. But the report said that the State Department and the USAID have turned the public international organizations, which is its term, the PIOs. That's their term for NGOs. Okay, they're non-government organizations, whatever you want to call them. Well, they have turned them as the primary means of delivering this aid, but, quote, have been inconsistent in their efforts to formally require the PIOs to agree to U.S. government oversight on how the funding is spent and whether projects are delivering intended results, rather than being diverted to the Taliban. So, in other words, they gave the money and then just turned a blind eye and said, okay, here's the money. Okay, we're not going to hold you accountable to anything. And of course, billions of dollars have been going to the Taliban. We're talking about terrorism here. For example, the USAID mission to Afghans standard contract with NGOs did not require them to permit American officials to visit to see what they were actually doing. So the contract didn't even say in there that we could check up on them. USAID had a contract with a third-party monitoring group whose visits it could have used as the next best thing to American eyes on the ground. But it seemingly paid that group without actually having to do any visits, the Inspector General report said. So they just okay, hey, we're gonna hire this third party group to do what we are not going to do, and then they just paid the group and didn't do anything about trying to find out where the aid was being spent. USAID seemed to simply trust the groups receiving the money, which were often partnerships with foreign governments. That, of course, didn't always go well. For example, USAID funded the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, UNICEF, as a lot of people like to pronounce it, for a water sanitation and hygiene project in Afghanistan. Okay, and this was last year, 2024. Okay, that sounds really great, right? Water sanitation and hygiene project in Afghanistan. It never bothered to visit. The Inspector General did, and found numerous issues that UNICEF did not report to USAID. Had USAID conducted site visits, it could have identified these deficiencies and asked UNICEF to address them. Likewise, the State Department units in highly sensitive areas, such as the Bureau of Political Military Affairs, the Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement, they paid for programs whose operators wouldn't even let their benefactors check on them. The Weapons Removal Office did not make site visits part of the contracts, and some beneficiaries, including the UN Mine Action Service, refused site visits. Those visits would have been helpful, of course, because it turned out that the groups weren't always, let's say, forthcoming. Okay, the UN Mine Group at one point suspended activities due to Taliban officials attempting to renegotiate the PIO's operating agreements, but didn't tell the State Department until months later. Only 1 out of 5 State Department bureaus reviewed by the Inspector General included language in its standard contract saying the recipient agrees to allow access for site visits by USAID and or its agents as necessary. The State Department also does not require PIOs to report instances of division, which means instances of waste and fraud and abuse and corruption, coercion, aid diversion, and interference by groups like the Taliban. So they don't even if they know about it, they don't have to report it. USAID is supposed to require its contractors to report such misconduct, but the USAID and the AFG included an optional diversion reporting clause in only some of its project contributions. Quote, without diversion reporting, USAID and state will not know the true extent to which the Taliban is interfering with the benefiting from the U.S.-funded activities. This is what the Inspector General said. Now, state bureaus and international narcotics and law enforcement affairs and the Weapons Removal Office do not include a reporting division clause in their agreement templates, meaning that the bureaus may not be receiving timely reporting or incidences of division or interference, despite the obvious potential for fraud or deadly interference by terror supporting groups. Some instances of that are known. Like, for example, in 2024, that just last year, the Taliban asked the State Department beneficiaries to make a list of people who were receiving benefits and to let the Taliban be involved in selecting who would benefit. The Taliban also forced the non-government organization, or the NGO, to suspend mental health and psychological support activities, as well as suspension of a female youth center. Of course, they don't they don't see females as human, right? And so they wanted suspension of that female youth center. State's Narcotics Office, the INL, may have also had a casual attitude towards aid diversion and transparency. Here's the quote: when we asked INL for information about aid diversion in May of 2023 and February of 2024, it claimed to have no information. However, in September of 2024, INL provided us with an October 2023 report from the Colombo Plan that outlined 8 instances of Taliban interference. This is what it said. It said the Bureau learned about these instances through meetings in December of 2022 and January of 2023, and INL did not explain why it did not share this information when we asked. Now, the Inspector General said the Secretary of State should require all agreements to allow site visits and develop a standard process for beneficiaries to report fraud and misconduct. Well, duh, right? I mean, here, I'm going to give you billions of dollars, but I'm not going to see where it goes. And I'm not going to see if it goes to terrorist groups. I'm not going to see if you're actually doing what you say you're going to do. I'm just going to give you the money and walk away. Because, hey, it's not my money, it's the taxpayers' money, right? Quote, monitoring projects through periodic site visits, including by third-party monitors, is an essential management tool to help ensure the U.S. taxpayer money is not being wasted on projects that are not meeting their intended goals or that are undermined by interference by the Taliban. This is what the report said. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this week that most of USAID has been abolished, as we talked about, and its remaining programs will be moved to state. That decision came following concerns that its grants and contracts often amounted to just simply a slush fund for nefarious international actors. And of course, that's exactly what it was. And this needed to happen a long time ago. And basically, we've been funding terrorism. And there's just no two ways around it. Well, let's speaking of corruption, let's move to this next one. And this next story involves Joe Biden, and you remember him, right? He was president of the United States at one point, we think. And a government watchdog is sounding the alarm on former President Joe Biden's liberal use of an Autopen to sign official documents, saying it raises concerns about who controlled the presidency, given Biden's cognitive decline. I didn't even know that an Autopen was a thing. Okay, I did not know that. I had to look it up. I had to see a picture of it. Right? It's a kind of a weird looking contraption, but it is a thing. And Biden pardoned 6 criminals on December 30th of 2022 with the exact same Autopen signature, while the president was vacationing and golfing in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And this is according to the Heritage Foundation's Oversight Project. Quote, note, they all say they are signed in the city of Washington. This is what the Oversight Project said on a post on X. Okay, so he, President Joe Biden, is in the Virgin Islands. He's golfing. And somehow his Autopen is signing his name to stuff that it says he is doing it in Washington. Around the same time, an omnibus spending bill was flown to Biden in the Virgin Islands to sign, but the pardons all appear to be signed by Autopen, said the watchdog group. So it's not like they couldn't get a hold of him, right? They signed the omnibus bill. They sent it to him for him to sign there, and he did. But these pardons were not a part of that. Quote, whoever controlled the Autopen controlled the presidency. That's from, again, the Oversight Project. Some prominent documents, including, get this, Hunter Biden's pardon and Biden's announcement that he was dropping out of the presidential race, appear to be hand-signed. This is according to the watchdog group. Okay, so those were hand-signed. But however, several other controversial pardons, including those of Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and the January 6th committee, and other Biden family members, were all signed with the same Autopen signature. Kyan Brosnan, who is the chief counsel of the Oversight Project, this is what he told the Daily Wire. And Brosnan said that using the Autopen to sign presidential pardons is particularly troubling, since the authority to issue them rests solely on the president as a constitutional principle. Quote, you have to look at it in the context of President Biden's mental decline. This is what Brosnan said, noting that the special counsel Rob Hur's report last year called Biden an elderly man with a poor memory. He said, I think we all saw with our own eyes his mental and physical deterioration over the course of his presidency, and there's article after article that comes out showing how the Biden administration and his staff shielded him from public view, re-tinkered his schedule throughout the presidency, tried to script even what reporters he was calling on at the press conferences. And that volume of evidence shows that President Biden wasn't really running the White House. It was the staff. So if he's not hand signing these legally operative documents like pardons or even bills into law, that raises another question, of course. The Justice Department should look into what the Autopen policies of the previous White House were, whether certain individuals were authorized to operate the Autopen, and what the approval process for affixing a signature looked like. We need to figure out who was actually running the country for the last 4 years, Brogdon says. Brosnan said any legal cases against Biden's signatures are still hypothetical, but he pointed to the questions around the Chad Wolf's status as acting Homeland Security Secretary back in 2020, which resulted in a judge ruling that some of Wolf's actions cracking down on illegal immigration were unlawful. So, yeah, this is something we're going to keep an eye on. Obviously, he doesn't have all his faculties together. He wasn't all there. He's not all there currently, and he wasn't as president. And so his staff were really the ones that were running the country. And now we can see they were having to do that through the use of the Autopen. But we don't have, the corruption in politics isn't just for the United States, right? In fact, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, you remember her, allegedly covered up a report from her country's foreign intelligence service that concluded that the likelihood that the coronavirus pandemic originated from a Chinese lab was overwhelming. But she didn't want anybody to see that. The BND, the Germans' version of the CIA, conducted an intelligence gathering operation dubbed Saramara, I guess is how you pronounce that, that it concluded that there was an 80 to 95% likelihood that the pandemic originated during a lab incident at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The findings were contained in a report from a joint investigation by two German newspapers that alleged Merkel decided to keep the bombshell that she learned about in 2020 under lock and key. Merkel likely made the decision to keep the explosive report secret, at least in part because she did not want to help President Donald Trump's re-election prospects in 2020, which much of the world resisted his well-founded claims that China was responsible for what happened. And the report and its cover-up by Merkel are likely to sink her approval numbers even lower as she grapples with facing intense backlash over her disastrous policies that have just wreaked havoc on her country in Europe. The backlash against Merkel hit new levels after she wrote a new memoir, hoping to secure her crumbling legacy. This is what even the Wall Street Journal reported, which noted that the effort is backfiring, actually. The more than 700-page book was riling up even some of her most ardent supporters because she does not believe that any of her failed policies were bad for the country, including allowing millions of Muslim refugees from the Middle East to be resettled in Germany. And that has been disastrous for not just Germany, but all over Europe. Powerful German state broadcaster ARD titled the headline of their report on her book, "Much Pride, Little Self-Reflection." I like that. That's really good. Merkel's Christian Democratic Party blame her directly for the problems that the country is facing, and they say that her memoir is making things even worse. So, quote, the publication of this unrepentant, self-righteous book at a time of economic and political turmoil like this is hurting her political party. This is what former senior Merkel official noted. The report said that her approval rating was plummeted from her time as a popular elected official to someone that the German public has turned against. Her allies overseas have abandoned her support for her, and this is even according to the report. The most shocking part of the report focused specifically on her retelling of why she allowed millions of Muslim refugees into Germany. And Merkel said that it was fully irrelevant whether they had a right to stay in Germany or not when she let them enter the country. Irrelevant. Wow. She then blamed the German people, of course, right? We've seen this game before, right? We've seen this movie. She then blamed the German people for the problems that the refugees caused. The consequences: failed in integration, ballooning welfare spending, rising crime, political polarization can be partly blamed, she writes, on Germans' lack of will to change. Oh, man. The decades since she instituted her open door policy, immigration has changed the face of Germany and its political dynamics. An average of around 400,000 immigrants, the population of a large German city, have entered each year, and Germany now spends as much on refugees as it does on defense. The report noted that the phrase that Merkel repeatedly used to justify her failed policies, that she had no alternative but to do what she did, served as the inspiration for the alternative for Germany, or the AfD party. So anyway, yeah, it's like I say, it's these type of things, these type of thoughts, these type of bad leaders are not contained to the U.S. shores. And speaking of terrible leaders here in the U.S., Los Angeles Democratic Mayor Karen Bass, you remember her? Well, her text messages from around the time the destructive Palisades fire began were not saved, a report found. This is interesting, is it not? The Los Angeles Times sought the text messages as part of its reporting, requesting all text messages sent and received by the mayor as she was returning from Africa on January 7th or January 8th that specifically mentioned fire response or travel plans. So they put in this order, and you can do that for public officials. You can put in an order to see what all of her text messages said. Well, David Michelson, the counsel to the mayor, responded to the request saying that Bass's phone was set to was not set to save text messages. This is what the Times reported. Michelson further claimed that there was no requirement that a city official or employee save their text messages. So there's I had just set mine not to save text messages, don't you? The Times, however, noted that the city's own document retention policies say records must be kept for at least 2 years. Of course, what she's saying is, well, there's no records to be kept, right? Michelson argued that such retention does not apply to text messages. Yeah, they do. There is no setting on most smartphones that keeps them from automatically saving text messages. On iPhone and Android users, they can set their phone to delete text messages after a certain amount of time, with the lowest actually being 30 days. So the Times says it filed a records request within 3 days of the fires starting in Los Angeles, and Michelson did not respond to any inquiries about that. Bass was out of the country, of course, in Ghana when the fire started, despite previously telling constituents that she would never leave the country in her capacity as mayor. Yeah, well, that lasted a long time. She left Ghana that evening and was back in L.A. The next day with access to her phone for the entire trip. And it took Bass' office Bass's office 2 months to respond to the Times request, saying there was no responsive record. Bass was heavily criticized, for course, for slashing nearly $18 million from the fire department's $837 million budget, with critics arguing that budget decreases left the city ill prepared to fight the fires that raged through LA for nearly a month. And the fires consumed nearly 60,000 acres, killed at least 29 people, and destroyed more than 16,000 structures, causing billions in property damage. At the time, President-elect Donald Trump accused California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom of failing to properly manage water in the state. He alleged that the Newsom's incompetence led to a fire hydrants drying up when crews tried to put out the fires. So-called experts in urban water supply dismissed Trump's claims, though. And here's the quote: Governor Gavin Newsom refused to sign the water restoration declaration put before him, and would have allowed millions of gallons of water from the excess rain and snow melt from the north to flow daily into many parts of California, including the areas that are currently burning in a virtually apocalyptic way. This is what Trump published on his social media. But anyway, we have time here for a couple of things when it comes to kind of getting away from politics. Well, I don't know. Maybe this, I guess, still falls into the political realm. But but I've been asked to do more along the lines of celebrity. So here we go. Rosie O'Donnell finally confirmed rumors that she moved out of the United States following President Trump's victory, as she called out legacy media for not doing their job. In a nearly 10-minute long video posted on Tuesday on TikTok, the 62-year-old TV personality, comedian / vocal supporter of the Democratic Party, that type of thing, said on January 15th, before Trump was sworn in as the 47th president of the United States, she and her 12-year-old daughter, Dakota, who now goes by Clay, by the way, moved to Ireland. It's been pretty wonderful, I have to say. This is a quote: "The people are so loving and so kind, so welcoming, and I'm very grateful," O'Donnell said, noting that she decided to move because it would be the best for myself and my 12-year-old child. So, yeah, she said it's been heartbreaking to see what's happening politically, and hard for me personally as well. The personal is political, as we know, and she just continued to try to bash Trump and say that's why she left. So anyway, at least what I think anyway is that you have to give her credit, because she said she was going to move if Trump was elected, and Trump was elected, and she moved. So you have to at least hand it to her, because most of these celebrities, say, "Oh, well, if he wins, I'm out of here." Of course, he wins, and I don't want to deprive the U.S. of my skills and talents and whatever they say. Well, at least she did what she said. I mean, you have to give it to her. I just don't see why you have to make a big long video about it. You just move, right? But anyway, kind of interesting. And one other thing too, I thought was really kind of interesting. And it's almost sad that this is a story, but Millie Bobby Brown definitely got everyone's attention when she talked about how she can't wait to become a mom and start a family with her husband, Jake Bonajovi. During the 21-year-old actress's appearance on Smartless podcast, the Stranger Things star said that she's starting a family, and she said that starting a family isn't just important to her, but to Jake as well, noting that they both come from big families. This is what People magazine reported. Both of them tied the knot in May of last year, and they said, "My mom actually had her first child at 21, and my dad was 19. This is what Brown said. "And, it's been my thing since before I met Jake. Since I was a baby, I told my mom, like baby dolls, I wanted to be a mom just like the way my mom was to me." I mean, that's really cool, right? She also said that, she said, and my nan, like my grandmother, she was a huge part of my life. And so, yeah, I mean, Jake knows how important it is to me. And of course, I want to focus on really establishing myself as an actor and as a producer. But I also find it's so important to start a family for me personally. It's a huge thing. Jake was like, we cannot do that until we get married. So that was his thing. Um, this is just really cool. I think and she's getting, she's getting some backlash, of course, from liberals. Oh, talking up family and this type of thing. But she's also getting some kudos from conservatives and saying, you know what, family is first, and that's really cool that she wants to have a family. And she's willing to take, some slings and arrows, from different people, because that's her attitude. So anyway, it's kind of sad. It's a thing, but it's really cool to see nonetheless. And I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Of course, we're also on YouTube as well. And I'd love if you would click that little link and you would get notification every time that the new one comes out. So anyway, again, thank you for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite